Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be ranking healers from easiest to hardest when it comes to specifically Mythic Plus content. This is looking at Season 2. I will talk about some of the Season 3 changes, but at the end of the day, this is looking at the current server patch. I do think there could be some big changes in Season 3 in terms of which hero builds are going to be the most popular and things like that, but I don't think the tier list is going to change all that much, and if it does change in Season 3, I will make a new updated video. And I'm ranking healers here based on multiple different parameters when it comes to reactive healing versus proactive healing, when it comes to being melee versus range, when it comes to the rotation. There's multiple different things to consider here, and on top of that, there is a lot of healers that have a low skill floor but high skill ceiling. So because of this, I'm going to try and meet those healers in the middle. Basically anticipating that a new healer or new player is looking to play the game. They're looking for an easy healer to pick up to do mediocre keys. Not the highest keys in the world, but they're looking to start their journey and possibly climb. And this video is going to be aimed at that type of player. Now, if you like this content, like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and let's go and get started. And this is going to be the tier list that I'm using. The easiest is going to be at the top, and closer to the bottom is going to be the hardest healers. And again, as I mentioned, we're going to use multiple different parameters for this, and we're going to start off with the first healer, and there's no big surprises here. This is one of my main healers right now. That is going to be Restoration Shaman, more specifically Totemic Resto Shaman being included in that easiest or most chill section. If you look at the pure healing rotation for Totemic Resto Shaman right now, it's probably one of the easiest out there because you do so much passive healing out there. You have your Surging Totem. If you have a melee comp or a stacked up comp, this works even better in Mythic Plus, and that is one of the new meta builds when it comes to pushing Mythic Plus content, is that you get as many melee and they stack around your Surging Totem, so you get to do a lot of healing. Your downpour gets value. And then you have a bunch of passive healing from things like Healing Stream Totem. You have to remember, because of the Healing Stream Totem, you are also getting chain heals coming out because of the Lively Totems. And because of reactivity, your Healing Stream Totem now also heals a second ally at 100% effectiveness. Blizzard actually updated the tooltip in Season 3 to showcase that your Healing Stream Totem is extremely powerful. By pressing couple abilities, you're doing a bunch of passive healing, and then you're allowed to do other things depending on the situation. Of course, if someone's taking damage, you can press Riptide, you can use things like Healing Surge depending on the damage that is happening, but on paper, in terms of the pure healing rotation that Totemic Resto Shaman has, it's arguably the easiest in the game. The difficulty for playing Resto Shaman is your utility and how you use it. You're one of the utility kings when it comes into Season 2, and it's going to continue in Season 3 as well. You have things like knock up, knockback, depending on how you talent into it. You have AoE stun, you have one of the best interrupts in the game, you have purge, you have decurse, you have poison cleansing totem, you have movement speed increases, you have slows, you have a plethora of utility items. And one of the biggest distinctions between an average Resto Shaman and a good Resto Shaman is how they use the utility, because let's be honest, the healing is very, very simple. At the end of the day, Totemic Resto Shaman is the most chill healer for me, especially if you're running that stacked up group when it comes to the Mythic Plus content. There are ways to express your skill in terms of mana management, in terms of utility usage. And again, I do have to talk about survivability. I do think that Resto Shamans, because they're stacking versatility, or crit verse is a very good stat. If you have a lot of verse, and you should, that means you're taking less damage. You also have Earth Shield on yourself, and with Earth and Harmony, you're getting extra DUR. So depending on your group composition and how high of a key you're doing, you might actually be one of the tankiest person in your group outside of your tank, obviously. And again, this depends on the key you're doing. For example, you might be doing TOP, and there's going to be big AoE damage happening on the arena boss, and some people might be like, I might not survive this. Resto Shaman doesn't really have to worry too much about it. You still have a couple of defenses you can press, but you are passively tanky because of your stat priority, because you do have Earth Shield on yourself and all those things. So a lot of the times, even if you don't press your defensive, you might still passively survive big AoE hits and things like that. Of course, this is going to heavily depend on the type of content you're doing, but something worth mentioning. And lastly, we did talk about stat priority. For Totemic Resto Shaman, haste is not really an amazing stat, and therefore this spec can sometimes feel a little bit slow or sluggish, especially if you're coming from other type of healers, for example, like Resto Druid, who stacks a lot of haste, and you're just pressing hots all the time, you're pressing heals, you're pressing buttons, your fingers are starting to hurt. Totemic Resto Shaman is quite the opposite, and I think if you're someone who's gravitating towards an almost slower type of gameplay, this healer is gonna tick all the boxes for you. And now let's talk about our second easiest healer in this list, and that is going to be no surprise, Holy Priest. Now, I do think there's multiple different things that happened to Holy Priest over Season 2 that made a lot more builds viable when it comes to all forms of content. There's builds with Prayer of Healing, there's builds without Prayer of Healing, there's builds or hero builds that are more difficult to play versus hero builds that are easier to play. So I'm trying to take a middle ground in here. I don't know where to place Holy Priest here, right beside Resto Shaman or in its own type of row, indicating that Holy Priest is a little bit more difficult to play than Resto Shaman. I'm not sure. I'm gonna take the middle ground and place it here, and I'll tell you exactly why. And this is my Holy Priest, and I've been trying out multiple different builds when it comes to that Mythic Plus content. This is one of the things that I've been trying out. Don't look at the hero builds exactly. I've been messing around with a lot of different options. I've been running Oracle with Prayer of Healing, and I think this feels like a relatively complete healer to me because you have a lot of options for different type of damage patterns. But that doesn't necessarily mean this is the best build. There's loads of Holy Priests running Archon. There's loads of Holy Priests running builds without Prayer of Healing, and the gameplay feels a little bit different. For example, while playing with Prayer of Healing, you have things like Prayer Circle, where Holy Word Sanctified reduces the cast time and the cost of your Prayer of Healing. You have things like Lightweaver, where Flash Shield reduces the cast time of your next heal or Prayer of Healing within 20 seconds by 30% and increases healing done by 18%. You have things like Resonant Word, where casting Holy Word spell increases the healing of your next Flash Heal, or Prayer of Healing. You have so many modifiers for Prayer of Healing. For example, if I press my Flash Heal, I get Lightweaver. If I press my Sanctify, I get Prayer Circle, and I get Resonant Words. And now my Prayer of Healing is a lot more impactful. So there is multiple different modifiers or gameplay options that can modify your Prayer of Healing, and it kind of feels fun to play around. And probably the biggest thing that confuses people when you're playing Oracle is premonitions, because there's multiple different premonitions. How do I use Premonition of Insight, for example? And all of those things. For example, I'm going to use my Premonition of Insight. I might use it on something like Prayer of Mending. So there's multiple ways to optimize premonitions, which buffs to use, when and how, and all of that, but it all comes down to the fact that you don't even have to play this build. You have multiple different builds available for Holy Priest, depending on how hierarchy you're doing, or depending on which gameplay you enjoy more. Remember, especially for these weekly keys, you can play whichever build you enjoy more. Maybe you enjoy something a little bit easier, maybe you enjoy something a little bit more difficult. Again, just play whichever build you want, and once you start climbing keys, you might look at what other players are looking to min-max everything. You play around your Holy Word spells, you have multiple ways of reducing the cooldown of your Holy Word spells. That's basically how the class works. And as a priest in general, you suffer from that Passenger Princess syndrome because you don't have an interrupt. You're the only class or healing class that does not have an interrupt in this game. Your utility in terms of stops and things like that, you do have fear, but you can't even use it on all types of mobs. You do have utility in terms of like PI, in terms of fortitude and all those things, but let's be honest, you're most likely going to sit in the back, heal the people that need healing, and you're just gonna have a nice and chill time. If you want to min-max this, obviously you can min-max your DPS, you can min-max your healing, who do you press PI on, you can get a weak core for that. So there is a lot of this sit in the back, heal type of thing. And let's be honest, that's going to appeal to a lot of players out there because they might re-roll a heal and they might be looking for someone like Holy Priest who can sit in the back, the range, the reactive. You're going to heal people when they need healing. You don't want to track everyone's interrupts, everyone's stops, because you just want to do your own thing, and I think Holy Priest is going to tick all of those boxes. And lastly, I did mention there are multiple different builds available to Holy Priest when it comes to all forms of content, and if you do end up playing a build which doesn't have Prayer of Healing in it, there is going to be a lot of that triage healing, which is not the end of the world, but personally I find it a little bit boring when it comes to that type of healing. I really wish Blizzard would invest even more time into making Prayer of Healing a little bit more accessible, maybe reducing some of the talent point investment and all those things, but we'll have to see in Season 3. And now let's talk about our next healer, and that is going to be Oracle Discipline Priest in this case. Now, this is a video looking at Mythic Plus content only. If I was looking at raids also, I would probably have a different ranking for this. I'm going to assume, again, I said this at the start of the video, that I'm assuming you're an average player doing somewhat decently high keys, but not the highest keys in the world. I think I'm going to place Discipline Priest just a little bit higher above these guys right here. I do think that Discipline Priest, or specifically Oracle Discipline Priest, it has a low skill floor, but it also has a high skill ceiling, and I'll tell you exactly why, because I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions around Oracle Discipline Priest. And this is my Oracle Discipline Priest, and I know majority of the community consider Oracle to be extremely easy, and I can tell you right now that in these lowish keys, pressing Penance and Shield is going to carry you through a lot of the situations out there, because you are buffing your shields, because you have talents like Wheel and Woe. Shielding is still extremely powerful, and it's one of the main reasons why Oracle Discipline Priest is considered to be so meta. Now, once you start doing higher keys, once you're doing fights like Candle King, for example, Rot type of fights, look at the amount of cooldowns you need to organize. This can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the person that you are. If you're someone who wants to utilize every single aspect of this spec, You have double pain suppression, you have ultimate penitence, you have evangelism, you have your pet, sorry, you have your barrier, you have multiple different versions of premonitions that you also need to optimize. You can do Candle King and you're like, okay, I'm going to chain these in such a good way in order to optimize my healing, or sometimes I'm going to overlap certain cooldowns because they're not strong enough by themselves to carry the healing. So if you're looking to optimize this healer at a really high end, you will have to put in the work. You have so many buttons which can be absolutely fantastic because you have answer for a lot of different type of damage events. But you can also be a type of player who's like, okay, I'm gonna swap over to Oracle Discipline Priest, it's so OP, it's so great, I'm gonna press my penance and shields, I'm gonna give everyone such a juicy shields. Once you get to higher content, you're gonna have to learn to play this spec properly, and I don't think it's the easiest spec out there, especially when you're trying to optimize every single cooldown that you have. So I think the difficulty of this spec is going to severely depend on the type of content or how high of a key you're doing. I also think that you are a priest and you suffer, again, passenger princess, you don't have an interrupt, you have fear, which is, again, it's not really all that amazing. So you're just sitting back, you're healing people, you're giving them really strong defensives or externals like pain suppression and things like that. You have a weak order to track on which person to give PI or power infusion. You're sitting back, you're a ranged healer, you're optimizing your shields, you're giving people big shields. In raw type of fights, you're optimizing your cooldowns. Of course, there are moments where you might be using your Dominate Mind and Mind Control. So at the end of the day, I do think that Oracle Discipline Priest can be a relatively chill healer to play, especially if you're not doing really high content. When you start doing high content, you have to optimize everything about this spec, and that doesn't go just for Oracle Discipline Priest. It goes for every single healer out there. And I do have to talk about Premonition again, because it does confuse a lot of the new players out there. And as a Discipline Priest or Oracle Discipline Priest, you might press your Premonition of Insight, which gives you CDR to your next 3 spells, and you might use it on something like Penance Shield to give more powerful shields to your party. In Season 3, they're also giving you more Premonition of Insights, which will most likely give you or access to more powerful shields. We'll have to see how that's going to be balanced in Season 3. And now let's move on to our next healer on this list, and that's going to be Holy Paladin. This is technically the first melee healer in this list, and I genuinely believe that being a melee in Season 2 is more difficult than being ranged based on all my testing. I played every single healer out there to a varying degree, multiple different key levels and things like that, but I'm going to place Holy Paladin in this B tier a little bit on the harder end, and let's talk about why. I genuinely believe Holy Paladin got a lot better over the last couple of patches and things like that. Your Holy Shock, your Holy Power Spender, specifically Eternal Flame when playing Herald of the Sun, packs a punch. And I think Herald of the Sun is the best playstyle right now in Season 2 in all forms of content. In Season 1 it was different. The Lightsmith was actually the way to go, and Blizzard likes to change up the best hero builds. I'm not sure what the best hero build is going to be in Season 3, but the gameplay between Herald of the Sun and Lightsmith AC build is quite different. And again, I did mention that Holy Paladin is a melee healer. You want to stay in melee, you want to press your Crusader Strikes, you want to press your Consecrations, you want to interrupt and all those things. But if you do have to step out of melee, especially with that current build in terms of Herald of the Sun, I don't think it's the end of the world. Your Holy Shock, your Eternal Flames, they do pack a punch. And I think the biggest difference between a bad Holy Paladin and a good Holy Paladin is how you manage your cooldowns, or how do you keep the party alive when you don't have your cooldowns. In this dungeon pool, there's so many dungeons, for example like Priory or something like Floodgate, where your trash bags back to back require a huge amount of healing, and you're not going to have cooldowns all the time. And this is when there is a clear separation between good and bad. You might use your sack, you might use sack and bubble because you don't want to be in danger. You might use bop on someone who has bleed or something along those lines. Tracking debuffs, very, very important. You might save your lay your hands because you know you don't have cooldowns for this moment and there's going to be a lot of damage and I need that oh crap button. This is when utility usage is going to be very, very important. And in Season 3, Blizzard is actually shaking up your spec tree. You no longer have to spec into Tears Deliverance in order to get Relentless Inquisitor. There's also a couple of changes with Infusion of Light and things like that. And at the end of the day, Holy Paladin is a reactive healer. You are a melee healer, but it's not the end of the world if you have to step out for a second. And I do like the power of Holy Shock. I do like the power of Holy Power Spenders like Eternal Flame and things like that. I think it is a very fun healer and you can make it work. You just have to be extra careful about your cooldown usage, especially in those push situations. And I do think Holy Paladin could use some help when entering those push scenarios in that Mythic Plus content, but a good Holy Paladin can really make it work. And now let's talk about our next healer in this list, and that is going to be Mistweaver Monk. Now this is another melee healer, but in my opinion, if you stick with that GG build, it is one of the most truest form of melee healer out there, and being in melee, utilizing your uptime is going to be extremely important. I'm gonna place it somewhere here in that B. I don't think it's the most difficult healer out there, but I don't think it's the easiest either. And I think being a melee in Season 2, it can be extremely punishing. Let's go and talk about it a little bit more. Keep in mind, when I'm talking about Mistweaver Monk, I'm talking about that GG, I'm talking about that Jade Fire Stomp, I'm talking about that Jade Fire teachings. Utilizing your melee uptime is extremely important with this. I'm sure there's other builds that people are using. I'm sure there's builds that are not focusing on melee that people can make work and things like that. But this is one of the popular builds right now. I have a lot of fun with this, but honestly, it can also feel extremely exhausting. We talked about melee healers before. There's a lot of melee healers in World of Warcraft, but depending on the build that they're using, they might not have to be in melee at all times, or if they have to step out for a little bit, it's not the end of the world. In Season 2, there is a lot of dungeons out there where you might be, you know, hitting the boss, hitting the trash, it's all good, then a swirly comes out, you need to run away, but everyone's also taking a huge amount of damage, so you can't fall back in damage, but you also have to move, and you can't hit the boss or trash back. And that can be extremely daunting for new players. Now, it's not like you can't heal outside of melee. You have things like Jade Empowerment, which is honestly one of the best additions to this spec, because you might have to fall out of melee, you might not be able to hit the boss or trash back. You can just press your Thunder Focus T into Crackling Jade Lightning and then just see the HP bars go up. Blizzard has been tuning Jade Empowerment like 20 times now, so I'm not sure what it's going to feel like in Season 3. Maybe there's going to be further changes and things like that. So in my eyes, if you're someone who's been playing World of Warcraft, especially played a melee character before, and they're looking for a healer that has similar vibes, Mistweaver Monk would be my #1 recommendation, because this is as close as you're going to get to a pure melee healer out there, because you are encouraged to stay in melee as much as possible. I talked about the downside of being melee, and you can let me know your opinions. Do you think being a melee is harder than being ranged? In my opinion, it is, especially in this season. I'm not sure what it's going to look like in Season 3. We'll have to test out a couple of more dungeons. There's a lot of returning dungeons as well. If you like that type of gameplay, Mistweaver Monk can feel extremely rewarding. If you're someone who's new to melee healing, who's not really comfortable with melee, give it a try, see if it works for you, and let me know if you stuck with this healer. Now let's talk about the next healer, and honestly, this is by far the hardest one, and I know I'm going to get so many comments for Resto Druid, because this is, in my eyes, a healer that has a low skill floor and extremely high skill ceiling, and it really depends on what type of build you're running, what type of player you are. For a lot of high-end players, Resto Druid might actually be considered one of the harder healers. For a lot of entry-level players, depending on the build they're playing, depending on their playstyle, they might be considered to be quite low or quite easy to pick up. This is why I know there's going to be a lot of mixed, divided opinions about Restoration Druid. I'm going to meet you in the middle on this. I'm going to place it somewhere in here. I know there's going to be players who think Resto Druid is a lot easier than this, and there's going to be a lot of players who think Resto Druid is harder than this. So let's meet in the middle and talk about the reasons why. So first of all, Restoration Druid is a definition of a proactive healer. If you don't have your HOTS out or your ramp or whatever before the damage happens, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to not like this healer at all. So if you don't like that type of gameplay, if you're more of a reactive healer, for example, like Resto Shaman, it sees damage, someone takes damage, you heal them. If you don't like proactive healing, stay away from Resto Druid, because it's a proactive healer both in Mythic Plus and raid content. But on the flip side, I think there's two types of Resto Druid players out there. Now, first of all, this is my Resto Druid right now. You can absolutely play Keeper of the Grove. You can even do high keys as Keeper of the Grove type of build. You don't have to go into melee. You can play magic damage. You can go into Boomkin. You can press DPS abilities once in a while. And you can just play proactively all the time. Just apply HOTS on everyone. And if something happens, hey, you're going to press your regrowth. Regrowth is going to be your top heal, but you also want to empower your regrowth by having HOTS on players. So there are players, what I like to refer to as the babysitter build. They might play like this in some poke situations that they don't feel comfortable about. They might just want to have a very safe time. And I don't think that kind of gameplay is all that difficult. Again, you're pre-hotting everyone most of the time, you're not staying in melee, you're not doing cat weaving, you're in that range, you don't have to go into melee. That removes a lot of the complexity in my honest opinion. And then there's another side of Resto Druid players who are playing that Wildstalker build, who are optimizing the kitty DPS, who are optimizing their prio damage, who are staying only in kitty form or DPS when they're able to do it. They know exactly when every single damage pattern is going to happen. They're like, okay, damage is going to be incoming in the next couple of seconds. I better start prepping. So this is what I mean. Where do I place Resto Druid in difficulty rank? Do I assume everyone's going to be playing Wild Stalker and will know every single damage pattern? So do I assume people are going to take a more chill approach to Mythiclus? This is why I'm meeting you in the middle in terms of the ranking for Resto Druid. But at the end of the day, Resto Druid healing is really strong if you know how to utilize it. It's one of those healers that can actually meet most of the healing checks out there without actually having many cooldowns. Just think about this. You can do or meet all the healing checks out there if you know how to play Resto Druid without actually having to sacrifice or use many cooldowns, because you just don't have that many cooldowns. A lot of Resto Druids might use Convoke the Spirits for DPS because they don't need it for healing. So just to highlight the fact that this is a healer that you can pick up and master it, and you can really get rewarded because the healing can be so strong. You can do Candle King 20 plus 22 Candle King, do 6 million HPS without running out of mana. Like, this is the type of levels of healing you can do. You are a rot type of king out there. Now you can also do something like Big Mama in the Floodgate and be like, okay, I didn't prep my hots before the intermission, everyone died in a couple of seconds. You need to know the damage patterns if you want to play this healer to the absolute fullest. The reward is there for the people who are willing to put in the effort, but the difficulty of this healer is going to severely depend on the type of damage that you enjoy, how high of a key you're doing, and the damage patterns that you need to learn for or prepare for. Now let's talk about our last seal, and that's going to be Preservation of Evoker. And I don't think it's a surprise for anyone that I'm going to be ranking it. I actually don't even know, should I place it in here or should I place it even a row below, because I do think Preservation of Evoker, especially for a new player coming into World of Warcraft who hasn't read any guides around the healers and trying to understand around Preservation of Evoker and all the little tips and tricks, it can be extremely overwhelming. I'm going to be placing it somewhere here, but honestly it's up to you to decide, or let me know which or where you would place Preservation of Evoker. In my eyes, this is the healer that has a high skill ceiling, but also can be rewarding because Blizzard keeps buffing their output. And I know there's going to be die-hard Preservation of Evokers watching this section and they're like, what, Preservation is not all that difficult. I've been playing it for all the years that it's been out. I've been having a good time. And I agree, like if you know how to play this spec, like any spec in World of Warcraft, you can get used to it, you can optimize everything. But just think from a perspective of a new healer coming into World of Warcraft. They're kind of like reading up general ideas about Preservation of Evoker and they're like, hey, let's go and look at how to optimize Lifebind. Let's go look at how to optimize Echo. These two abilities by themselves, if you actually read around them, they're some of the most unique things in the game, especially Echo. It's so versatile. I honestly think Blizzard took some of the more complicated or advanced features from other healers and placed it into Preservation of Evoker. And Pres Evoker has these combos because you have things like Stasis. Now, keep in mind, in Season 3, Blizzard is trying to simplify Preservation of Evoker because you now have a choice node where you can pick up Stasis or you can pick up Reduce Cooldown on something like Rewind. So I think Blizzard is trying to simplify Pres Evoker, but I'm not sure if they're going to succeed, and this video is focusing on Season 2. So just think about the little interactions the Preservation of Evoker has. For example, Stasis and Dream Breath and all those things. Before you press Dream Breath, you kind of want to press Verdant Embrace because you want to utilize Call of Ysera. So let's say you press Verdant Embrace, you press Stasis, you press your Temporal Anomaly, you press your Dream Breath is going to be more powerful, and then you press something like a Spirit Bloom. Now, if you activate your Stasis, when Stasis comes out or when Dream Breath comes out, it's not going to be buffed by Verdant Embrace. That's something that might not be obviously clear to you. But you might do some tips and tricks. For example, your Stasis is about to expire, I'm going to press Verdant Embrace, I'm going to press my Stasis, Dream Breath is going to shoot out, and that Dream Breath is going to be more powerful. So there's multiple different interactions that I just mentioned that Preservation of Evoker has, on top of the fact that a lot of in Season 2, there is a lot of emphasis on Lifebind and utilizing Lifebind, and trying to learn about how to utilize your Lifebind can also be extremely daunting. Don't get me wrong, you can pick up your Preservation of Evoker, press your empowered abilities, and do a good amount of healing. But if you really want to utilize every single aspect of this spec, there's so many ways that you can play around your Stasis, play around your Lifebind, play around your Echo. Now let's talk about range limitations and playing around them and things like that. Majority of your healing abilities are limited to 30 yards. Now there are a couple abilities that have longer range. For example, Rewind is 40 yards and things like that, but generally speaking, range limitations get brought up a lot. But you can absolutely play around this because look at this. Let's say this is a hunter who's going to stand in middle of nowhere and you know they're not going to be standing with the group. You can apply echoes on them and you can get out of the range. Your whole group is here, you're healing them and stuff like that. This person is middle of nowhere, but they have echo on them. You can press your healing ability and that echo is going to mimic that ability or the way that the echo works. And you don't have to be in range of them to do that. You only have to be in range in order to apply echo on that person. Now, is that fun, rewarding, or interesting to play around? That's up to you to decide, but you might not even feel the range limitations all that much, but you might do the last boss in Rookery and you might ask yourself or question your decision about playing Preservation Evokers. Every single player should try out Preservation Evoker at least once, because it might be one of your favorite healers to play, because it does have empowered abilities. It has a high skill ceiling because it keeps you playing a bunch of different combos. It is a proactive healer. You need to know before damage is going to happen in order to utilize a lot of your healing abilities. So you can grow with this healer. If you enjoy empowered abilities, you're an extremely mobile healer also. You do have range limitations. You can play around them in multiple different ways. Chrono Warden is the way to go in Mythic Plus content. We'll have to see if that's going to happen in Season 3. So this is my summary of the easiest healers when it comes to Mythic Plus content in Season 2, with some information around Season 3. If this tier list is going to change significantly in Season 3, because there might be new hero builds that are going to be better. If it's going to change, I'm going to update this tier list, even though I don't think it will change drastically. At the end of the day, there is a lot of open interpretation in terms of, for example, Restoration Druid. I talked about this in the Resto Druid section. I think this healer has a low skill floor and extremely high skill ceiling, so it depends on type of damage types or content you're doing. So you could place Resto Druid somewhere here, or you could place Resto Druid somewhere here. It really depends on the type of player you are. I'm going to be placing it here because I'm trying to meet people in the middle. You probably already noticed that a lot of the melee healers are placed in that more difficult section, because that's not by accident. I genuinely believe that being a melee in Season 2 is more difficult than being ranged, especially based on the dungeon pool. I talked about this in the Holy Paladin section, specifically in Mistweaver section, because that GG build does require a lot of that melee uptime in order to optimize everything around that spec. I also think it's worth noting that every healer has proactive elements to their rotation, to their cooldown usage and all those things, but certain other healers rely more on knowing damage patterns before they happen, and I think that can be relatively more difficult for new players coming into the game. So guys, let me know what your tier list would look like for healers, specifically in Mythic Plus content. Keep in mind, this is not taking raiding rotation into consideration. If I would consider raids also, this tier list would look a little bit different, because a lot of healers out there, in terms of raiding rotation, it might be a lot more difficult than in Mythic Plus. That actually is a thing. A lot of the times, healers in Mythic Plus play so much differently than in raid. Different hero builds, different talent builds, different type of priority and all those things. Let me know if you would like to see maybe a rating tier list for difficulty, and if you like this content, please like and subscribe, because it really helps out the channel. This video was pre-recorded because right now I'm in Spain, I'm on my holidays, so I can't wait to go back and do more testing for Season 3.